it. And in the course of this, we found out that self-sustainable solutions are absolutely essential. Otherwise, of course, it wouldn't last for very long, this experiment. Good. Now, these types of networks happened all across Europe. Vienna is not is just an example now, because I lived there and I knew exactly how it was built. But this also happened in Amsterdam, in Berlin, in different cities in Germany, in Paris, around Barcelona, and in Athens. So in Vienna it was like that. We started with this anonymous hotspot. We wanted to build an anonymous hotspot because the data retention laws were coming at that moment, and we wanted to see, is it possible to have a hotspot where people can just surf the internet without being logged? Okay, so it was more of a legal issue actually. And we were counseling with lawyers. We talked with them and asked how would the data protection laws. Well, okay, it's like that. We have strong data, as you know, strong data protection laws in the EU, and the data protection laws say you're not allowed to log longer than you need for billing. So after the billing process is finished, you have to remove the log files. So the solution was pretty simple. We said we didn't bill. There's no billing process involved, so therefore we have to remove the log files immediately. We asked the lawyer if that's actually true, and this became sort of the standard model for hotspots now in cafes, because they don't want to do all the logging. It's just too cumbersome. It's not necessary for them. So you have this splash page in the beginning, terms of use, accept, and that's it. No billing involved. I think it's originated here, at least in Austria. So that's where we got to know Wi-Fi is a pretty interesting media for us. And we started to think about how can we do that in the developing world. We didn't go there, we didn't manage that yet. I think Old PC has been doing more here, and others. But we found in a book that somebody wrote about this hotspot and about a network which was being abandoned. Wi-Fi and experimental network, 10 roofs. And we asked we called the guy and said, do you need those roofs? Do you need those initial 10 roofs? And he said, no. I mean, I would stop that project anyway because he was using too old technology at that moment. So what happened is we went to the roofs, we looked at the equipment, it was old stuff, too expensive. We replaced it by very cheap Linksys routers with OpenWRT, flashed them, had our own Linux on top of him, and started to experiment with mesh. And we tested different protocols, and at that moment the oldest ARP protocol was the only usable solution. There would have been different ones, but at that stage of the development it was actually what we found usable. So actually then we invited the public and said, you know, we're building this network, you're allowed to join. The only conditions for joining the network would be if I route traffic over your node, you have to pass it on. And vice versa. That's the only condition. Okay, so where are we now? What did we achieve? You saw the picture in the beginning. Pretty large network. I just counted before. We have 674 entries in the routing table. That means probably around 500 devices, really, and 240 roofs. And this whole network has been repeated in the second largest city in Austria, in Graz, in rural areas, and that's where they really need it. In Vienna, we actually don't need it. It's an experiment. We have fiber optic connections theoretically to almost every house. They just don't turn it on because that would kill all the other ISPs. So the city built it as part of the sewer construction works. Okay, we're, I said, halfway to the distance to Bratislava. We have a very active community, and actually we're starting to do our own fiber connections now, because that's where you have, of course, the massive bandwidth. Okay. I said before this happened, yeah?
You say you're doing your own fiber connection in the middle mile, and how are you funding them?
Okay. That's pretty expensive in Vienna to dig correctly, yeah. So what we did is we're sharing the costs with the owner of a house where our co-location center is. I'm coming to that, and basically we had to save for it. that's the answer. We really had to save for it, and we're handing DSL.
Existing
No.
services, or are they all hopping to a shared point of access?
Very often in Europe, they share DSL lines. For us, we actually wanted to share the uplink because we're in a special situation where we were really lucky. We started right across the Vienna Internet Exchange. Across the street, there's the Vienna Internet Exchange. So the fiber optic connections below the street, they're still easy to do. We can't invest millions, but we can invest this one distance, this one road. So
You're offering that for free to
yes,
everybody who's
yes, we're offering the bandwidth from that roof for free to everybody. So these networks happened in different forms in parallel. Each of these networks is very different. I'm describing what happened in Vienna, but in Berlin, for example, they shared DSL lines. In Deutschland, they started to care for their own connectivity on the whole countryside because the telecom industry left that out. They decided it wasn't efficient enough and it wouldn't pay off to invest in that region. Deutschland is in Denmark. It's a far-off region in Denmark. And they started with Wi-Fi, and now they're doing all kinds of different technology. Then Barcelona, all around Barcelona, there were unserved areas. So there's a ring of Wi-Fi all across Barcelona, around 5,000 nodes. That's one of the biggest ones that I know. Athens Wireless is, well, they like to do their own things anyway, so they're very independent, and they created a network which has 2,400 nodes approximately now. The Paris network is not so big. I think it is sleeping, a little bit dormant right now. And a very interesting network is the Czech free network, which is covering almost the whole country. All the cities are covered, and I'll show you some pictures of that. Okay. In Vienna, in the Funkfeuer network, it's very similar to the Berlin network. We have been coordinating all the time. We developed the things in parallel. So the most important aspect of it is, for us, is the Pico peering agreement, meaning free transfer. If I set up a node, I will allow anybody to hop packets over my node and vice versa. And the rest is done by the mesh routing protocol, which finds the proper paths. So if one node fails, or if somebody moves out from that flat, has to take down the node, or the wind comes and crashes it, it will route around it. Okay, so said before, the bandwidth is provided by us. How we're going to do that, I'm coming to that shortly. And we keep it intentionally as an experimental network. So that means it's dual. Sometimes people want to have their internet working, and then they will, of course, say, oh, we experimented with the network right now. But it still happens. We're trying to reduce that massively. We're trying to have two virtual networks on top of each other, one stable one and one experimental one now. But that's the definition. So the interesting aspect is, of course, that the network itself is a value. There's no real commercial interest in the network, but having the network and having it running on its own is already a great value. And funny enough to see is that we have a very interesting text here on all of our splash pages. I think you know it. It's in a standard Freifunk framework. I don't know how often it's cited, but and all of our routers is there by default, just to make people understand, what they're using actually. So I think you know that text. Okay, so who is involved in that community? Many students from IT and electrical engineering. So we have a very high nerd factor. But we also have a heart surgeon in our group. We have a journalist, a dentist,